Morning fiends. Okie dokie. Touching back on yesterday. So I posed the question, what do you guys kind of feel like is your greatest compliment? You know, like, so when someone gives you a compliment, you know, what are the ones that have been profoundly impactful was the question. And I'd just like to take the time to share with you my opinion on this question. So I feel, in my opinion, one of the greatest compliments I ever received was, first let me tell you the story, right? So if a lot of you don't know my background, I grew up in Melbourne. Like a lot of our whānau, we left our hometowns in New Zealand, wherever you may be, went over to Australia, whatever reason, and me and my family ended up in Melbourne. So I grew up in Melbourne, in and out of the prison system there. So I grew up in the Victorian prison system is what I'm trying to say. And in the Victorian prison system, especially during the 80s, not that I was there, but I was there in the late 90s, or, you know, mid 90s, late 90s, if you include my boys home stuff, because, you know, we all knew growing up who the guys were. And then when you get to Pentridge, I met a guy by the name of Richard Mladenovic. And if anybody's watched the Underbelly, you know, the Underbelly series with Carl Williams and all of that carry on, well, he's in that series, and he's you know, the guy that's in the boot when Dino's got those guys in, that fella in the boot, and then the boot pops open in the garage and he jumps out and the police, you know, I'm sure that's not quite how it happened, but, you know, they made out like he jumped out of the boot, runs away, and the police just, you know, act like they didn't see nothing and let it carry on, you know. So that guy, I met him when I was 17 years old in Pentridge. You know, got to know him, introduced myself, blah, blah, blah. Hey, Rich, how's it going? His name was Mad Rich, or King Rich, if anybody, you know, happens to know who I'm talking about. And I introduced myself, you know, how's it going, bro? Yeah, my name's Tani. And he's like, oh, kia ora, Tani, and me. Fuck, how's it going? Well, then, you know, a few months later, I bumped into that man on Russell Street, on Russell Street in the middle of the city. He was, at that time, he had a big gash on the side of his face. When he spoke, all his pus and all his shit would come flying out of his mouth. If anybody remembers the story, and you were around in the mid-90s, late 90s, and you remember Rich at this time, I'll tell you the story, right? So he goes, there's fucking Marys. He's like, and this is my point, right? So the compliment he gave me on this day, so we bumped into Rich, and he goes, oh, how's it going, Tani? Fuck, you know, how you been, bro? Blah, 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 blah. And right at that moment, this is where I'm going, right? That compliment of remembering my name, I was only a 17-year-old, and this man was the hardest man in the prison system in Victoria. He was the only man that could leave his shit in the cell in Pentridge and nobody would steal it. And he took the time to remember my name. And in my experience, and like the feeling I got when he took the time to, like, 'cause you got to remember, this guy was the baddest man in the whole of the system. Like the stories were that Chopper Read knew that this guy was going to be such a bad guy and an issue in Pentridge that he fucking whacked him over the head with a shovel. And this is back in the days when Chopper had a bit of reputation, like I'd say 70s, late 70s, early 80s. I'm not sure exactly, but this was the common knowledge story in the yards in Pentridge that Richard got shoveled over the head by a fucking Chopper Read. And from that day on, Richard was just the baddest. And he took the time to remember my name, and that had a profound effect on me, where I thought, fuck, what an amazing feeling. You know what? I'm going to take the time to remember other people's names like that man took the time to remember my name. And ever since then, I've tried my best. I may have forgotten some, but if anybody knows me, they know that I have quite often taken the time to remember their names. And that's why it's had such a profound effect on me, because I remember the feeling. And it wasn't so much the feeling, it was the man that it was who he was. So, like, I wouldn't care if it was just your average fucking, you know, run-of-the-mill Joe Blogs guy that, you know, took the time to remember my name. It wouldn't mean too much. But the fact that it was him, and he took the time, and, you know, the reputation and all that, just, you know, for me, it was profound. And then the other thing, so he gave me 2 compliments on the same day. You know, he goes, took the time to remember my name, you know, being tiny. And then he goes on to tell me about, you know, like I said, how these Marys, these bouncers. So apparently, you know, Rich being the standover man, these bouncers must have not knew who he was. And they fucking smashed the bottle and they fucking, you know, poked him up. He was literally, he had like a cross his cheek was flapping open, and he used to just take heroin to medicate himself to fix it. And that's what he was in Russell Street for, the penny parlours. Anybody knows Russell Street penny parlours? That's where he used to go in town to get your heroin. And he'd go there to stand over little dealers. Like, he'd literally grab them, make them spit their balloons out, and then he'd just, off he'd go and go have his fun. And literally, actually, this is where I'm going. Sorry, whānau. So the other compliment this man gave me, you know, because we were talking blah, 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 and he goes, Tane, you're a gentleman. And that, in the Victorian system, so in the Victorian prison system, being called a gentleman by another man, or especially a friend, one you consider another gentleman and a friend, and one whose word means something to you, when you're called a gentleman or a toff, especially in this system, that was considered the highest form, the deepest form of respect. And that's where I'm going. So, in my opinion, the compliment I strive for from the people I love and care most about would be to be called a good man or just a gentleman, a toff. And I try my hardest is where I'm going with this. So I brought this conversation up is because I bring this up because I'm looking at the world today and I'm seeing some horrible shit. And I think back to my prison days, right? Like in prison, and I hate to use this analogy, but I'm going to use it in the sense that the prison environment is a much nicer place. You can expect in a prison environment common decency, respect, and just good manners is what I'm saying. If you walked around in the Victorian prison system and you were one of those rude types that like to give evil looks or, you know, gossip about people or just even mutter under your breath about what you think somebody's doing, if you tried any of these behaviours in a prison environment, especially the Victorian one, you would be putting yourself in so much danger because it is discourteous. It is disrespectful. What happened to just plain old good manners, being a gentleman? Hey, opening, closing doors for people. It doesn't even matter if they're women or men. Opening, closing, saying thank you, saying good morning, saying good night. Just being a good guy or a good lady, good woman, whatever you choose to be. And my point is, out in this outside world, especially you know with the social media, like we're seeing some like weird shit, and I bring this up because some of that behaviour, it just wouldn't fly in a prison environment, and I bring that up because I think, like, where's this breakdown happening? Like, how is a prison environment a much nicer place to live in the sense of the politics and how we all treat each other? Because in there you have to treat each other with respect, because let's say somebody's having a bad day and you fucking, you know, give him a fucking, you know, duty look. That man could quite easily go, you know what, I'm having a bad day. I haven't spoken to my missus for 2 months, haven't seen my son for 10 years, whatever. I don't know, could be locked up for 15 years straight now, having a bad day finally. And because I was the guy that just had a bad attitude, disrespectful, I was the one that copped the brunt of his fucking explosion. And this can happen out here too. It's not just in jails. This shit happens out here. And that's the problem. I don't know, I'm babbling on a bit, but my concern is I feel like we've got some of our priorities mixed up where we forget to be good people and we forget to just have some common decency, some common manners. You know, and I brought this up with my gym thing. Like, I was talking to a guy named Paul. I met a bit of a guy that follows my content, Paul, in the gym. And Rebecca, she does some content too. And I asked the question, I said, bro, you know, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, nah, like, you know. And when I walked in, he had 2 benches. And I was like, hey, are you using this? And he's like, yeah, I'm just going back and forth. So he had 2 benches, whānau, right? And I walked in, I was like, no, that's fine, mate. If you're using them, that's all good. I just wanted to look around and see what I can use, and then I'll choose my workout with what's available. I'm not going to assume I can walk in and take either of these benches that you're using. If I feel it's so important, I'll ask you. Okay, hey, my mate, is it all right if I work in? Do you mind if I have the bench? Because I don't like working with others. I don't know, but I'd communicate it, because that's what we should be doing as adults, mature men. We should be able to communicate our position without expecting or being entitled, right? So, you know, walking into the gym and thinking you're entitled to just take anybody's piece of equipment, nah, that's just wrong. You do not have any entitlement to just walk in there, especially if somebody's got their equipment on it and they're using it already. That's theirs. So, like it or not, so then Yeah, I'm babbling a bit, but that would mean then I can walk into the gym, regardless if anyone's using it or not, I can just walk in. And that don't make no sense to me, so that's my point. Bad manners that would be, and I don't encourage that, and I wouldn't encourage that in my children. She's a big yarn, this one today, whānau, so, Fiend, sorry. Got my dogs just wandering around, so that's the yarn. That's what I consider my greatest compliments, was being called a gentleman or a toff by Richard Milanovic, aka Mad Rich, aka King Rich. And yeah, it's had a profound effect on me, and I just wanted to share that. And yeah, get involved. Don't forget to walk your dogs.